There is a course available right now for a certain amount of money. ILT, so instructor-led training. There's Diagnostic and Troubleshooting course for ITMS 8.1. If you know anything about our platform, a lot of the stuff in 8.1 applies, of course, to 8.5. Okay, so this is a 2-day course. It's 6 hours of class time, and I think it's 4 or 5 hours of labs. So you can go onto our education site and enroll in it. It is also available as a 6-hour e-learning class, okay, with my wonderful, sweet voice, just talking away about caches and NSEs and so on. So it is available on the e-library. Just log in, register. You can take each one of the modules. And what this is a very compressed slide deck for this course, okay? And it'll give you some of the highlights. And my hope here was to put as much stuff as I could in this deck so that when we give it to you as a PDF, it could be a nice checklist for each and every part of our architecture that you want to troubleshoot. So both the courses online and the ILT, as well as the slide deck, we're going to separate things into the tools that we use, common tools that we see, resolving SMP issues, so that includes SQL as well as the agents and anything to do with the semantic management platform. Go into the common site issues, so looking at task server, package server, monitor, etc. And then into solution issues that you see out there. All right, so I'm certainly not going to read line by line. I just want to get you the highlights of what you should really do when you're looking at these problems. So most of you may know the tools. Again, treat this like a white paper, right? I'm certainly not going to read all the lines, but this will be a great read for you and an ability to go back and reference. So Log Viewer, this is the key. This is one of the most important things to know. It's a pretty icon. It's installed on the notification server. You can take the file and put it on your own desktop and run the logs. Take a look at all the logs that are in there. It's searchable. It's filterable, right? Errors, information, warning. It's pretty colors, shows you the bad stuff, shows you the good stuff, right? Right, it's called Log Viewer 2, and its purpose is to read the logs, right? So this is whether it's the agent logs, whether it's the server logs, okay? And the entire user guide is at this document right here, so Doc 8560. The log files themselves, these should be the first step in troubleshooting, other than obvious things like there's no power on the NS, right? In this case here, go to them first. You do learn to read them like the matrix over time. The documentation is fairly good when it comes to showing you what certain things mean. The development teams have spent a lot of time and effort over the years in making them a lot more understandable. You know, plain English or plain language searches and things like that. Errors usually point you to exactly what the problem is. All right, so what we can do is we can turn on different switches to get more information. Okay, enable logging at the error, warning, or info level. Okay, and understand if you go into verbose mode and you're saying logging, whether it's the server or the clients, verbose mode does create a lot of traffic, right? Because it's really expanding it to like 4 times the size of information. And that's right at the agent. So our server logs, as you probably know, are a.log. Our agent logs are called agent.logs. They're at these locations. And the Semantic Installation Manager logs are at these locations, and they're also named a.log with certain date information saying when you did it, when it was applied. Okay, so these are the locations of all our logs. The profiler, I can talk about this thing for 5 days. It's that important. It's got a lot of features. This is for really tracing things. So let's say you have a really bad report. It's coming up with timeouts or it's got errors, or a certain part of our web infrastructure or the NS is not behaving properly. You can basically start this. It basically records everything that's happening on that server, and it goes through every single part of it to show you where the timeout is occurring, where the error might be happening, where there's let's say a query that's running way too long. So this is basically going to track anything to do with the notification server. Right? If you're at this point, you probably have bigger issues than just something's just not configured properly. All right, it does have a doc, 8979. Okay, agent's health status. We've covered this many times over the years, but this is a very important tool when it comes to agent health to understanding why communication isn't happening, why you're not getting basic inventory. It's all right in front of you. Go into your console. If it's at that level of the agent or at the client itself, there's a lot of information here with a lot of troubleshooting tools built in. Okay, so I won't get into the real definition of each and every one, but basically it's showing you, here's the problem, and there's usually a tool beside it that says, go to the targeted agent settings, or reset the agent, or basically be able to change that state. Okay, as you know, in 8.1, we had the plugin versions added to this, so it'll show you the right colors, whether they're up to date at the plugin level. Allows you to go into the targeted agent settings to make changes right from the console. Diagnostic mode. So this one, it used to be you go AX, I can't even remember the executable, but now what you can do is you can enable diagnostics with the AXNS agent.exe by just going /diags. And what that does is, you can see here, it opens up a new view. You check the diagnostic mode, and it gives you all of these extra features, looking at policies, looking at the goods of certain items and so on. And of course it opens up the log tab, things like the certificate tab, so you can investigate certificates. Okay, so you do that at the local computer. You can also set it as a default in your agent installer page by putting the /diag as a command line. In most cases, you probably wouldn't do this for the average user, right? You don't want them to get too deep into these. All right, so lots of features from diagnostic mode. So we have another set of tools called SSE Tools. How many people have used these? Right, there we go. All right. So we've developed these over the last couple of years. And these have all the tools that you would use normally for notification server, database, as well as agent troubleshooting. Okay, so it's trying to help you save time in diagnosing problems. Okay, so we also have another one, and these are available. I think I have the doc. Yeah, so this is Info 25686. You can actually download the executables as well as the guides for them. And there's also SSE Reports. You go to how to, I don't know what happened to all my sixes, but 52986. This will provide you with a bunch of importable reports. So it comes in an XML file. You import it into your Reports tab, and it will list a whole bunch of stuff that helps you diagnose anything from package server problems to event history. There's a couple of really good server reports on there. And you can see in this table here what it's good for, right? So this report is good for server. This one's good for task, package, software management, etc. Okay, another important place to remember is obviously the scheduled tasks. We run a lot of things in the Windows Task Scheduler on the notification server. This is a great place to target and see what's running and what hasn't been. You might find things that are long-running processes, like if it's doing the NS nightly and it never ends, well, that would indicate there's a problem with it. Okay, so don't forget that we have a lot of stuff in here. All right, and here's some other honorable mentions. Now, we don't mention RAD because I don't believe we own it, so I'm not going to speak for the other developers of a tool. It's a very useful tool. How many people use the RAD tool? Exactly, it's awesome. Yeah. Mike, who owns RAD? We do? Oh, well, I'm changing that course. Apparently it's ours and we update it all the time. So in the next slide deck, I'll put it in there, right? So yes, RAD is a great tool. You might use any of the sysinternal suite of products, everything from TCP View to Process Explorer to see what's going on agents as well as your NS. WinDebug for other items, Wireshark for tracing and so on. Right, so these are common things you might actually use in troubleshooting. Okay, and we'll just get to some of the ITMS troubleshooting steps. All right, so first, obviously, when you start troubleshooting, doesn't matter what it is, identify the problem. It's simple 101 troubleshooting, right? What's the problem? What are you seeing? What's happening to the console? Is it too slow? You find that certain things that took 1 second before now take 20 seconds, or things are timing out. So identify where the core problem is. right? Identify the cause or what you think it might be. Is it an environmental thing where your images aren't deploying because DNS is down or something like that, or DHCP is not working, right? Where is it failing? Is there a noticeable service or an executable that's running on the server that doesn't seem to be working right? Okay, and which part is it failing? Is it a solution? Is it the platform? Is it the site services, right? Originating for your problem? All right. And also in remediation, what can be done to get that system up and running again? Is this a simple reset the Altiris service? Is it reboot the computer, right? And is the solution a short-term fix or something that has to be applied indefinitely? All right. And also know too, if you get to the point where you have to create a support case, know that there's going to be information that they need. Don't just call and say, I have a problem. If it's related to your semantic management platform, you're probably going to want to have the logs ready and other things that are associated with the issue, right? Know the operating system it's used, gather logs, get packages if there's a problem with a package, etc. All right, so there's two different types of troubleshooting that we do. Non-invasive, obviously, is inspecting all sorts of things that are already there, so things like reviewing the log files, right? Running traces, right? Whether it's the profiler, using SQL Profiler or debug view. Monitoring any communication, right? So anything between the agents and the notification server, the web communication, could be internet gateway, or running any kinds of queries. Now, invasive, of course, gets into a little more involved, or it's a little more involved. Okay, so this could affect the running system. It could affect your clients, right? So things like modifying the CMDB, modifying settings, testing certain states, and so on and so forth. Those are pretty invasive. Increasing the task interval, and having people complain that their software is not loading. But it's all part of actually troubleshooting. So the core settings, again, would be another example of going right in there and changing thresholds and other things, or the registry. Okay, and it's also important to know the top 3 things that are available for you for support resources. So in this case, obviously the Connect community is a big one. Make sure you're registered, get on that. There's a lot of people that have contributed hundreds and hundreds of articles and might be having the same issue you are. The support site, so support.symantec.com. This is where all the how-tos, docs, tech articles, and so on are. And don't forget your lonely little Semantic Management Console help. So the web help is right there. When you go into the console, you have the contextual searchability. It'll change the search page to the console part that you're in. Okay. All right, so let's just say you're at a point where you're at the results phase, or basically the end of your troubleshooting. You've either resolved it or you haven't. So in this case, if you resolve the issue, make sure you communicate the result back to the proper parties, whether it's the client or the user that was affected, or internal things like adding knowledge to the KB articles, maybe some anything to do with your help desk knowledge system. Make sure it's documented and communicated. Okay, so somebody can reference it later and use that same troubleshooting method. And if you haven't, record all of what you've done, contact Symantec support, okay, and know at least the minimum items here, right? Definition of the problem, what you diagnosed, what steps you took, what you changed, right? And they might ask for a whole bunch of stuff. Altiris Profiler traces, log files, right? They might ask you to replace DLLs, right? And things like that. All right, so that's just general troubleshooting. We'll get into some of the specifics here. All right, so one of the most common SMP issue that you see is the responsiveness of the console, right? So the course that I did shows 3 to 5 scenarios for each one of the segments. Like for SMP, I've chosen responsiveness of the console because it's a very common one. All right, so things like the pages are taking too long to display, switching between the views is a little slow, right? You might see a whole bunch of item exception errors or pop-ups and things in the console. And this is just a description of the basic troubleshooting methodology you would use. the number one thing for everything is make sure your environment's sound, right? It was properly designed. I'm not going to repeat this for each scenario, but it's pretty obvious. If you don't have a proper sized infrastructure, if you don't have the proper database IOPS and all that kind of stuff, those are the obvious ones. If it's configured too aggressively, it would be pretty obvious for responsiveness. And then you're going to go look at the logs, check any of the scheduled items or processes, check your web services, and then adjust any of them depending on the results. So we'll just dig a little deeper into this. So looking at your environment, you should know it intimately. You should know your environment and know how much RAM is used and CPU and the current resource utilization of your notification server as well as your SQL server. One of the most important ones to remember when it comes down to responsiveness of the console are these settings right here in the table. So I would say probably at least 80% of the time it's going to be one of these set wrong, right? Because there's a huge impact on these if you set them wrong. So agent configuration, every hour, we recommend after 1,000. Some people set this to testing, which is what, 1 minute. Do you imagine 15,000 agents reporting back and doing their thing every minute? That would be pretty bad, right? And also frequent resource membership updates. These do take a lot of SQL power, right? If you did a complete update on an hourly basis, it would probably never finish the complete update in a larger environment. Okay, so check your logs. Obviously, we'll go to our log viewer, or we can use SSE Tools to view them. You choose your favorite tool there. And you're going to look for things, actual text searches in the logs that talk about things like timeouts, item exceptions, unable to. You see these references in there, it'll point you to a service or an item or any other part of the log that will indicate where the problem might be happening. Okay, so hopefully it would suggest some solutions. Now, failing that, if you discover nothing in the logs, you move on to the next step, check your process, right? So go into Windows Services, right? You can use SSE Tools also to look at all of the, I would call them the Altiris named services. Okay, so look at any of them, look at the memory they're taking, look at the processor they're taking. If AXNS or ALTSVC is taking 100% of the time of CPU, there's a problem. It should never do that. Maybe at 3:10 in the morning, right, when it does its big refresh, but not all the time. Yeah, so it mentions here, obviously, anything running 12 hours or more is definitely not normal. Okay, you can also use the Altiris Profiler to investigate any long-running processes that might be happening. So in this case here, it might be a query that's just trying to do a summary and it just never ends, right? Okay, failing that, move on to IS. So these are the least likely as we go down the list, right? So check your web services, right? Look in your logs. SSE Tools will connect directly to your IS logs so you can view them in a nice little window, right? Look for any kind of heavy traffic. So one guideline is any IPs addressing a page more than 100 times in 8 hours indicates some kind of an issue, right? Okay, so you can investigate your web services, and that's pretty much it. At this point, if you can't find it, you're going to support, right? But to be absolutely honest with you, that table is one of the best guides you can have, right? Refer to your size of site or implementation and use our guidance. Either use them or go greater than what you see here. Okay. Okay, another big one is database-related issues. We know the database is the heartbeat of everything. You keep that tuned up and performing well, and your console and everything else will behave properly. So you might see sluggish response to many items in the console, web tasks, other views. You might see SQL Server performance degraded when you're using a lot of resources or doing a lot of tasks. You might be doing a lot of reports and so on, and you notice that it's just not reacting properly. So we're going to do a lot of similar things, like ensure your environment is sound. I'm going to just go right to that. So make sure it's sound. You know, it's all about sizing. It's about number of cores, lots of RAM. Make sure the SQL servers doesn't have locks and things like that to the database. Okay, but this is the 80% rule right here. So always eliminate the common misconfigurations of SQL Server. Yeah, we're experts, but sometimes we forget to do things. So in this case here, make sure your SQL Server is up to date. It's the obvious cleanliness of your SQL. Make sure it's up to date, it's patched, it's got the latest service packs that are supported, because it does include some performance performance fixes within them. So that's a given. Your memory configuration, yes, we can get very deep into the configuration of SQL Server and its memory optimization and all these other things. You'll see them on most of our support articles if you search on database. But these are the most important. Optimize ad hoc workloads should be enabled for your SQL Server. And also, don't forget that the operating system needs memory. Right? Often we'll just set the SQL Server and just say, okay, yeah, just take whatever you want. You know, you have that huge number, 2 gigabytes as maximum memory. Make sure that you reserve at least 4 to 5 gigs of RAM for the OS to run properly. Okay, file fragmentation. Always check and resolve with any standard defragmentation tools. And what I mean by that is all your disks that have the database and so on, don't forget, it's all about defragmentation too. It's a hard drive, right? May not be as necessary with SSD or SAN, but if you're using hard drives, definitely make sure they're defragmented. Okay? And that's using any standard tools that will do it. Okay, another one is you didn't configure a maintenance plan, right? So that should be a given. You have to have a maintenance plan unless you've got some customized scripting happening in the background. This helps our database a lot. It does a backup, it reorganizes and reindexes, it checks the database integrity, it purges certain areas, truncates. It's just a cleanup, right? So we've always had this guide. It's been around for years and years. How to 8589, that will help you set up a maintenance plan that's specific to a semantic management platform machine. And it resolves most of the issues. Okay, so failing that, you've done the obvious misconfigurations, you made sure they're okay. Go into the database health and performance tests, and you will determine exactly where the slowdown is happening. And we usually go in this order. Okay, measure table sizes, index fragmentation, etc. I'll go into each of them in detail. If you use the SSE Tools, you will have these reports built in, and you can run them directly from your notification server or your SQL server. So we start with the table sizes. It's on the table sizes tab. Once you run it, all you have to remember is all the tables should be less than 2 gigabytes. If you look at the entire list that comes up of the tables, all of them should be less than 2 gigabytes, and no 2 of them should be 2 digits greater than any other table. What that basically means, if I have one of the tables is 100,000, and the next one is like 10 million, that's 2 digits too large, right? Okay, so you'll see the number if you sort them. If you do have a fail, you would basically try and do a purging maintenance or develop a SQL maintenance plan on your SQL server to try and resolve these. Okay, index fragmentation, there's another test. What we can do is go into the SSE Tools, run that tab, run that report, and it passes if all the entries are less than 95% fragmented. So if you see a whole mess of them that are sitting at 99, it's time to do defragmentation. So in this case, we can run the Windows schedule called NS SQL defragmentation schedule. If you know anything about the what's new, that's enabled by default now in 8.5. Okay, so you can run that schedule manually in the task scheduler, or just make a maintenance plan and put it on a schedule. Okay, looking at the stored procedure duration. So there could be slowdowns because there's a stored procedure somewhere in the background that you're not seeing every day that's just continually running, right? Okay, so what this will do is go through all the stored procedures in the CMDB and tell you how long they're taking to execute, or if they have recorded a lengthy duration. So what you should see is none of the values should be greater than or less than, the average duration should be less than 30 seconds, right? So if they're all under that, you're good. They'll stick out like a sore thumb, basically. You'll see one that's 1,180 seconds. You'll go, okay, there's something wrong with that one. Okay, a little more advanced, and it's getting increasingly more advanced for troubleshooting as you go down this list. So investigate them. You can do repairs. If you have to repair a certain one, you'll see a patch stored procedure, let's say. You might have to do a repair. Okay, the other one is, of course, the connection test. So this is the CMDB plus network ping test that's in SSE Tools. So if you know anything about our database, we have to have 1 gig connection uninterrupted to your SQL Server. SQL Server and NS should have a 1 gig with no latency whatsoever. So this one here just does a nice quick test to test basically the cable between it, right? Okay, so what you want to do is let it run at least 10 iterations and make sure you ignore the first value, but everything underneath that should be less than 20 milliseconds, right? That ensures that the minimum 1 gig connection is happening between them. Obviously, if you run this on an NS with a SQL Server on it, it's going to be 0 right down the line. All right, so if you do see this, ensure that you got the 1 gig connection, ensure that everything's 100%. Use Wireshark if you want to trace between, right? So it's probably a networking issue at that point. Okay, another test is to evaluate the basic performance counters. So this is good guidance for you. You can apply a lot of these numbers to the Windows Performance Manager too, but inside SSE Tools, you just basically find these performance metrics and you look for the final ratings once you run it. So these are just suggested ones. These are the numbers that should be greater than or equal to for each and every one of them. So physical disk queue length, logical disk queue length is important. Processor time greater than 50, it should not be greater than 50%. Memory available, right? We have some guidance here too. If any one of these are outside of the parameters, follow the instructions you see here, right? So disk queue problems, add more IOPS, add more spindles, whatever you have to do to get that disk IO back on. Processor, obviously, if it has anything to do with the processor, you're basically going to be looking at why the processor can't handle the load, or just add more cores. Like it's easy, right? You just put another chip in. All right, and memory, same kind of thing. All right, so failing all of those tests and you haven't seen where the problem is, we're back to this table again. It's a very common thing. Make sure you're within these parameters, right? So meet them or have them set greater than these, right? So these are the things that will impact the database. Again, running a complete resource membership update every hour would absolutely affect the SQL database. There's no question. All right. Okay, so agent installation issues, there's so much to cover, but I'll try and get some of the highlights. So agent installation issues, I'm just going to go through this list because this should be very obvious to you now. If you're having an installation issue with pushing agents, pulling agents, getting them down on a machine, there's some obvious stuff, right? Does that agent have a direct connection between the NS and itself or the package server in itself? The obvious things. Can I ping it, right? Is it host name pingable, right? Can I ping that notification server or likewise? Permissions. So you're basically your administrator permissions to that local machines to install it. Does it have it or not? But a lot of these are going to be very, very obvious troubleshooting, right? If you're using a proxy server, was that set to the install? Okay. So lots of obvious things for installation. The same thing goes with communication issues. I'll try and touch on some of the big ones, right? So the number one thing for agent communication is the agent healthy? Go to your console, take a look at the reported health parameters. Is there anything indicated as red? Okay. Number one, make sure it's in the CMDB. So you've installed it, but it's not talking, right? It's got to be in the CMDB. Make sure there's an entry in your computer view. It's got a GUID assigned to it. Determine if it's healthy or not, obviously. Okay, this goes into a little more detail of when it's read and what it'll do. Okay, failing that, obviously reinstall the agent, uninstall it, reinstall it if you have to. Here's a nice listing of all the switches that you can use to get the agents up and running. Okay. Okay, move on to some site infrastructure troubleshooting. And as I say, you'll get this document and all the listed items. So task service registration issues. Make sure the SMP is sound, obviously. Make sure that you've installed the task service properly. And make sure the agent state on the endpoint is in good shape. So it's both sides. It's the task server as well as the agent. Okay, so the key things with the task service is to check in the right places first in a particular order. Go to your notification server, look at the site server settings as well as the task service. Make sure they're on, right? Sorry, make sure they're on. Make sure they're reporting. They will indicate that they're active. They'll tell you the number of agents connected to them, right? A lot of information in that report. Also make sure you haven't exceeded the thresholds. So if you set in the setting that only 1,000 agents should connect to any site server, you've got to make sure that you don't have 1,001 connected to it right now or attempting to, right? So keep track of that as well as the ports, ensuring that you have the proper port, the firewall rules to allow the tickle through and other task items. All right, check your logs. Look for anything that indicates task, right? Look for anything that might indicate a source of the issue, like there's a DNS service down or it can't communicate. All right, make sure the task server service installation is working. And some of the easy ways to do it is, number one, go on the task server, make sure the service is running. Browse to the task server website. It is literally a site. If you can't see it from another agent or another endpoint, then there's obviously something wrong with the web service. Okay, check your firewall exceptions, the obvious stuff, right? Task won't work if it's blocked by the firewall. Check there is a hidden, not really a hidden log, this is one you should be familiar with, the task management.log and the agent logs. The task management.log tells you everything about the task management service, right? If there's problems. It's not as common as the agent log, but it is also readable by our log viewer. Okay, check the agent state on the endpoint. So now we're moving to the client. We're saying it's not the task server, but it's the client. It's something from the client. Obvious stuff. Ping it. Look for, try and get to the web service from it. Try and get to the task services. Double check that you got the latest agent installed, right? Look again for firewall exclusions at the local agent, and check your logs on the client and task servers. Okay. All right, so package service, a couple of the guidelines. Again, we check the environment, make sure it's working, validate the site server configuration, and then validate the package service operation. So that's the order of operations for this. So you're going to go into the site server, configuration on the notification server, and similar to task, you have the readout right there. It's basically going to tell you the state of the package server. You know, are the packages all downloaded? Are they ready? Are there invalid packages and so on? As well as your settings. So publish code base types. If you're expecting to see UNC code bases and it's not selected, you're not going to see them, right? So make sure you know your settings. And the other important thing is to know the order of I think it's the order of operations in this case, or resultant policy. If my package server settings, which are the global ones, right, are saying HTTP and UNC, but the local site servers, or sorry, package server settings are saying something different, it's basically this plus this equals a resultant, right? So always know that the package server will only report what the result is between the two policies, right? So if the policy is only allow UNC, and then your second policy comes up and it says UNC and HTTP, that one overrides it, right? Okay, because there's a lot of people that would look at their package server and say, well, it's not showing me the HTTPS code bases. Well, it was set in the global, but the local package server policy overrode it and turned it off, right? Sometimes not that obvious, but. All right, so in this case here, we'll obviously look in the logs, make sure we don't have any indicators of package service problems or communication issues. With those, you find them, you resolve them using support resources. But this is probably most critical. So on the site server itself now, we're off the NS and we're off looking at reports. Make sure that you can ping it, the obvious network stuff. One of the biggest ones is the time. Don't forget to check the time between your package server and your notification server. If it's off by even 1 minute, you will have issues with packages getting delivered. You'll actually have invalid, you'll have other statuses that come through. So it's very important that you have time synchronization working properly. Okay, time zone not included here. We're just talking about the strict time. Double check your IIS. There's a good tech article that talks specifically to package services and how they work in the web. Okay, and check your agent logs for package-related errors, of course. All right, so at this point, if you've eliminated problems with the site server itself or the package server itself, you might start going and looking at how it's operating, right? So if it's an operation issue where it's not getting packages or they're invalid, you might have stale code bases, packages not ready in the console, right? You would go through a 4-step process. You verify the package status, you can recreate the code bases if you need to, perform a manual synchronization, failing that, and at the worst case, it would be checking your permissions on the package servers. Okay, we go into a lot more detail on that for each of those steps. Okay, this gives you an indication on how to recreate the code bases. Running a manual synchronization. This is mostly for stuck package servers, so basically things that might have indicators of invalid packages, packages not ready, a lot of the common things you might have seen. Good guidance on how to get them up and running again. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody.
To learn more, visit go.symantec.com/manage.